This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Well, that's very disappointing. Only 5 of you picked up on the deliberate mistake deliberate mistake that I made in my introduction. Well done to Greg, Roger, John, David and Tony. Donald Trump's mantra is, of course, drill, baby, drill, not burn, baby, burn. But you can see why I made that. You can see why I decided to make that deliberate slip. It wasn't deliberate, obviously. It was a proper slip. You can see why it happened, can't you? My brain's a funny place at the best of times. And I nearly started talking to you about Grenfell Tower before the news bulletin because I find something that there is such a hideous symmetry sometimes to between political rhetoric, dishonest political rhetoric, and the later reality, the later emergence of reality. So I'm afraid, hear the words of David Cameron talking about bonfires of regulations when I think about Grenfell Tower. I don't know whether you have that weird link in your memory banks as well, but I do, because, up to and including Jacob Rees-Mogg maligning the memories of the people who actually died that night by suggesting that they lacked common sense. That there's a particular political slant that hates all form of protection and regulation or laws that are designed to look after us. And bonfire of regulations assumes an epic resonance when you think about what happens when regulations regarding things like cladding are not properly imposed. And then you have this, for me at least, a juxtaposition of drill, baby, drill, or indeed burn, baby, burn, with the scenes that are going on in California. I've told you a couple of times recently, and I don't know how much longer we'll continue to talk about Elon Musk or how much we will talk about him. But the things I need to check to make sure they're not jokes list seems to be getting longer all the time. I told you I had to check that he had actually called for Farage to be deposed as leader of Reform Limited, because I thought that seemed unlikely given the amount of knee-bending and forelock tugging that old Farage had undertaken in the court of yet another billionaire. And I had to double check that. And the other one I've had to double check is that there would be attempts by Donald Trump's circle to blame what is happening in California on diversity and equality and inclusion training, or policies that are designed to address, systemic inequalities. And I think it was this rather jolly account called the New York Times Pitch Bot, which makes jokes about articles that the New York Times will publish in pursuit of ludicrous balance or false equivalence. And I think they did it. I think they did a joke about a member of Trump's administration blames, it wasn't New York Times Pitch Bot, I think it may have been anyway, it doesn't matter who. Someone did a joke about, oh, crikey, I bet they try and blame it on diversity policies. And then Elon Musk did. And so has Kellyanne Conway, one of those other strange acolytes of the incoming United States president. It's extraordinary, really, isn't it, that they can make jokes about things that are too ridiculous to contemplate, and then they can happen. The things can happen. And of course people believe it. Otherwise they wouldn't do it, would they? Steve's already been in touch. He goes, yeah, you're a lefty, James, just like Newsom, who thought it was better to let geckos and newts have their homes instead of clearing the brush away. You can watch the events in California where houses are exploding, spontaneously igniting as the heat around them gets so high. And people like Steve-O are convinced it's because of policies introduced to protect newts. It's extraordinary. And you sit here and sort of think, why are people so desperate to believe that it's got anything to do with anything other than, ultimately, than climate change? And of course you remember, because Donald Trump says, drill, baby, drill, and people like Steve start cheering. Drill, baby, drill. What do you do with the stuff that you drill? Burn, baby, burn. And one newspaper today, only one, carries on its front page, not the scenes from California, but news that world temperatures overshoot the 1.5% Paris deal limit for the first time. So you'll remember there was, for what it's worth, an internationally agreed 1.5 degree centigrade limit on global temperatures. And it went up. for the first time last year. Climate breakdown driving the annual global temperature above the internationally agreed limit, which supercharges extreme weather and, of course, causes, and I'll say this in quotes because the report does, misery to millions of people. So the average temperature in 2024 was 1.6 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. A jump of 0.1 from 2023, which was the hottest year ever, I think, and represents levels of heat never experienced by modern humans. But Stephen thinks it's because of newts. And that is because people like Donald Trump and Rupert Murdoch and various other media outlets and so-called think tanks have dedicated enormous amounts of effort to persuade incredulous people that what we are seeing in places like Spain with the flooding or California with the fires is all about diversity, equality and inclusion training, or policies to protect natterjack toads, and absolutely nothing to do with the continuing immolation of epic amounts of fossil fuels and the consequent belching into our atmosphere of the fumes that result. That's a very, very simplistic bit of science for you. So 10 minutes after 10 is the time. It's weird, isn't it? It's another day where we find ourselves guilty. Let's be absolutely clear about that. You don't have to be stupid like Stephen. You could just be ambivalent like me or kind of like me. I feel the reason I use the word guilt is that every time we turn our attention to these stories, I know we should be doing more. When we talked about the floods in Spain, I said to you, I wonder whether this will change any minds. I wonder where Spain will be in 2 months' time. I wonder whether people will recognise that there is a need for deep and profound change in the way that we approach these matters. I think I read this week that 6 banks in America have already dialed down their commitment to to net zero, because Donald Trump is coming into the White House, and therefore they no longer need to pay lip service to the need for net zero. You will be aware of politicians in the UK who try to make mincemeat. Where am I getting mincemeat from? Try to make capital. Try to make hay. There you go. Not mincemeat. Hay. Tried mixing my metaphors horribly there. Tried to make hay with net zero. I think I understand why it works. It's the same old story, isn't it? You tell someone that those bad people over there who are trying to do good are actually trying to do bad and take something away. They want to steal your car. They want to steal your job. They want to steal your biscuits. Down with that sort of thing. So it's not dissimilar rhetoric to xenophobia or similar. And then you take little bits of information away, don't you, from the scenarios in California. Did you know you're not supposed to have plants near your house? Did you know that? Even something as simple as a flower bed near your house, you should have concrete and nothing else running up to your to the walls of your property, because if the plants go up, and they'll go up first because they're sort of organic material. If the plants go up, then of course they're next to the house, and that makes it more likely that they're going to set fire to the house. What I would say is that the scale of it is almost impossible for our minds to conceive. I've got friends who've abandoned their homes. I don't know. One family we're friends with doesn't actually know yet. They probably do by now, but when we made contact yesterday, they weren't aware. They were fairly pessimistic that their home would actually have burnt to the ground. Another one have put everything that they can conceivably, all their sort of valuables, and you know, actually, I was speaking to him. We were swapping messages last night, and so he said something to me that had never occurred to me before. So you never think about the different kinds of valuable. So you might leave something behind that has much more material value than something you want to take with you, like in their case, the baby books. You know, the little books that you put together when the babies are born, with all of the first lock of hair in it, and the photographs of childbirth and things like that. So you take those with you, but you leave behind some electronic goods or even some sort of, you know, artwork that you might have on the wall, which is worth a lot of money, but which is going to go up in flames because you can only take with you what you can fit in your in their case, in your SUV, your sports utility vehicle. And you shouldn't have your wooden fencing too near the house either, Rob tells me, for the same reason. And there's anger as well, of course, in what you see today. If you have been persuaded that it's all the fault of lefties or eco-activists or natterjack toads or slugs, you briefly feel stupid. So David's been in touch. He says, time to switch off rather than listen to this lefty idiot. So describing apocalyptic fires in California and recognizing what every scientist in the world acknowledges makes David feel so stupid because he's been persuaded of the opposite that he can't literally bear to listen. He can't bear to listen to this because it's like looking in the mirror and seeing the stupidest man in the world looking back at you. And that's what Donald Trump appeals to. He takes away the feeling of stupidity and replaces it instead with a curious mixture of pleasure in other people's misfortune and celebration of ignorance. Why is California on fire? It's not a mystery. But if you ask Elon Musk, it's because of equality policies. If you ask Donald Trump, it's because of Gavin Newsom, is what he calls him. The governor of California is called Gavin Newsom. But as people are watching their homes burn to the ground and their livelihoods disappear, the incoming president of the United States of America is dedicating his time to thinking up hilarious, rude nicknames for his political rivals. Can we do this? Do we know? I mean, forgive me if I've done it before. I don't remember the answers if we have. But when we sit here a lot, don't we, talking about apathy, lethargy. I don't know how much of the lethargy is born of the lies, born of the climate change denial, born of the sort of net zero. Just ask them what their qualifications are. That's all. Farage's mates, what are your qualifications? Net zero is a terrible con. How much money have you got invested in fossil fuel companies, and how much time did you spend studying climate science or any sort of science at university? Whatever the answers are to those questions should, of course, inform your attitude to any opinions expressed in this field. But here's what I don't know. Right? What in an absolutely ideal world, and I don't know who can answer this, so I've got two questions for you. One I think would be quite easy to, well, not easy to answer, but one everybody can have a crack at, and one I don't think many people could. But you know that I have enormous, uncontrollable faith in my listeners, in my contributors. In an ideal universe, if you had a magic wand, let us say, or you had untrammeled power, not a magic wand, it has to be something that is achievable in the realms of corporeal reality, what would happen? What would governments do? I'm a little embarrassed, A, that I don't know, and B, that I've never asked you this before. So I know that we're supposed to stop using fossil fuels, but how would I get to work tomorrow? I know that we're supposed to make massive changes, but what would happen tomorrow? Does anybody know? If you really wanted to start driving down the global temperature, if you wanted to get it back below, or get the, and not just get the rises below where they should be, but even perhaps reversing it, what would you need to do? Here's some science, and I appreciate, and I know you're not listening anymore because you're so embarrassed by how stupid you feel, but I appreciate some people think the science is disputable, but the heating of the planet is primarily caused by the burning of fossil fuels. The damage to lives and livelihoods that we are watching unfold in real time in California will continue to escalate. It will get worse around the world until coal, oil and gas are replaced. Drill, baby, drill. Until coal, oil and gas are replaced. I don't know what that looks like. What does that mean? If you made me Prime Minister, if you made me King of the World, I sound like Boris Johnson now. I mean this. I genuinely mean this question. If you made me King of the World today with one mission, which is to reverse the escalation, to dial down the overheating of our planet, what would I have to do? Tomorrow. Like literally. 0345 6060973. Isn't it? I don't want to over-egg the pudding or indeed make myself sound ridiculous when you're sitting there thinking that the opposite of what I'm thinking. But isn't it incredible that I've never heard anyone ask that question before. Have you? Have you? I haven't. I've never heard anyone ask that question before. I know what the slogans are. I know what the banners are. I know what the protests look like. I know what the broad, big picture ambition or necessity is. And I know roughly, although it's obviously not my strong suit, what the science tells us. But if you made me king of the world, what would I have to start doing at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning? Well, I'd probably get the show out of the way first. It wouldn't be fair to deny you of my daily burblings without proper warning. But it's Saturday tomorrow, so I can I work weekends. So if you made me king of the world, I'd get up tomorrow morning and start doing what? What would it look like? World leaders, heads of state, 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. One more visitor from Idiot's Corner, because I had a conversation with my wife this morning about the fact that it's not that hot in California at the moment. So here is Mark, who writes that you're flogging a dead horse here. It's only 21 degrees in California. How is that warm enough to start wildfires? It's obviously been arson. Maybe not Idiot's Corner, because it's not a rude message, that, albeit that it's incredibly ignorant. Wildfires are about how the fire and why the fire spreads, and the dryness of bushland, the dryness of gardens, the dryness of land is determined by the average temperatures over a long period of time. So I'll give you some advice, Mark. Okay, go and get 2 logs, right? Put one of them in a bath and put one of them in the oven on a low heat. So dry one of them out and soak one of them, okay? So that allows you to create 2 alternative climates, one that's very warm and one that's not. And now try and set fire to those 2 logs in a 21 degree centigrade room, or 21 degree Fahrenheit, I don't know, just in a room that's not that hot. Now try and set fire to those 2 logs and then come back and tell me why this is not a conversation about climate change. Okay, I'm not putting you in Idiot's Corner. I'm giving you an opportunity to educate yourself. So what would I have to do tomorrow? 0345 6060 973. It's 10:21.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 23 minutes after 10 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Is it bad, says Joey, that I read about Paris Hilton's house burning to the ground and simultaneously read the next article about her purchase of a new private jet that she uses on a whim and then thought, yeah, you deserve that. Maybe I'm more sensitive to Schadenfreude, however it's spelt. You're not wrong, Joe. It's not spelt like that. But you can make that claim about everybody. And they do, don't they? So I could sit here and say, oh, it'd be great if the world wasn't heating up at the rate of knots. And someone could say, well, you go on holiday. Or you own a car. So if I was made king of the world, what would I need to do tomorrow to reverse the heating of the planet? 0345 6060 973. Fiona is in Kendal, and Fiona often talks to me on subjects like this, because not least because she's done the Just Stop Oil training. But have you got an answer to the question of what we would need to do tomorrow, Fiona, if we wanted to actually start making proper, meaningful, and crucially, I think, immediate improvement?
Well, I'd like to say, yes, I have, but really I've just distilled all the science that I've read and all the messages that we've been getting for many decades now. So I have got some answers. But first of all, James, and really importantly, that we all grasp this, we cannot reverse this. A lot of it now is baked in. All we can do is slow it down and get ready for what's coming. That's the problem. So,
well, the challenge remains the same. I'm now king of the world. I don't know if you heard the news. What do I do first? What do I do? I get up tomorrow morning. Okay. I assemble my crack team. Keith, you can have the day off tomorrow. I assemble my crack team and we start fixing things. What do we do?
Okay. So we start looking at what human beings... Sorry, my throat's not great. We start looking at what human beings really need to survive. And what human beings really need to survive is food, water. We need energy because we can't switch everything off overnight. I totally accept that. But we need those basics to be there. Our homes, we need safety, don't we? We need to feel all those things.
Hang on. No, I can't hang on because I've got loads of people waiting to talk.
We have to dismantle.
I can't hang on. I'm starting work tomorrow, and all I'm getting from you is rhetoric.
We start with dismantling the systems.
What does that mean?
Got us into this mess in the first place. We turn around to the fossil fuel companies and we stop them, just like Henry Ford did almost overnight in the Second World War. He stopped making cars and he started doing war prep. We put everything on a war footing. As a government here, you and me or whoever would be there, would be reaching out to all the countries in the world and we'd be signing a non-proliferation treaty to say no more fossil fuels. We cut them down as fast as we can.
Well, you can't do that. You can't do that. What you cannot tomorrow ban the use of fossil fuels everywhere.
No, listen,
I don't want to hector you.
No,
I know, but that doesn't mean anything. What do I do? What is the law that I pass? What will they be allowed to do? How much fossil fuels will still be permissible?
Well, that's where you get your experts in. You don't sort of get your Just Stop Oil supporter like me or your
But you have to, because it's what you're campaigning for. You have to tell me what it is that you want.
We have got skilled scientists. We get a cross-party.
No, but this isn't an answer. Forgive
me,
Fiona. It's not an answer to my question, is it? Ask someone else is what you've rung in to say.
You get the experts.
I know, but you're saying ask someone else. I'm saying what do I need to do? And you've rung in to say ask someone clever.
You get a crack team together of people who know what they're talking about.
Yes, I know all this, but what are they going to tell me to do?
They're going to tell you to stop investing in renewable fossil fuels.
That doesn't mean anything. It says what we get out of bed tomorrow morning and we go to work, and you can't say, well, we've got to do this and do that and do these other nebulous notional things. This is the problem that I'm trying to highlight, and I'm grateful to you for helping me. This is the problem that I'm trying to highlight. One of the reasons why we don't do enough or indeed anything, and we're going to do a hell of a lot less after Donald Trump gets back into the White House as a planet, certainly as a Western world, is because even the people who appreciate the urgency of the problem, like Fiona, don't have answers to the simplest of questions. And that's messaging, isn't it? It's like what you know, in terms of psychology or marketing or whatever it would be. What X leads to Y. In order to achieve Y, we must do X. What's X? Assemble a crack team of experts. Use less fossil fuels. We all know that. We already know all this. But we don't do it. So if I woke up tomorrow morning as king of the world, what would I do? And you say ban single-use plastics. How? How would you do that? What would happen to all the people who work in the factories that make single-use plastics? Who would pay their wages? How would they pay their rent or their mortgages? What about all of the infrastructure that we have that depends upon fossil fuels, that depends upon single-use plastics or multiple-use plastics, all of the side effects of crude oil production? You remember doing it in chemistry, don't you? You did a picture of that big sort of vat, and the oil goes into it, and the gases come off the top, and then other products come out. Loads of stuff comes out of oil, more than we even realise. You say stop producing it. What happens to all of the things that absolutely rely upon its production? I don't know. It's a depressing thought, but it's an important question. Paul's in Marlborough. Paul, what do you reckon?
Hi. So, James, thanks for taking the call.
You're very welcome.
My suggestion would be that we need to rapidly upscale the investment in both research but also in startup companies and startup companies that are in existence working away to remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. It's called CDR, carbon dioxide removal, or because we're British receptionists, we call it greenhouse gas removal in the UK. We have to get to net zero. The net in net zero has a meaning. It's the removal of the greenhouse gases that are residual.
So what do I announce tomorrow morning? 10:30 tomorrow morning, I announce that
we're going to spend at least £1 billion on greenhouse gas removal, which will be a whole range of things. So afforestation and reforestation, growing trees, which helps a little bit in the short term.
Yep.
But larger scale investment in direct air capture, which is like large vacuum cleaners that suck CO2 out of the atmosphere.
Where does it go after you've sucked it out of the atmosphere?
Well, you can mineralise it. There's a company called Climeworks in Iceland that's doing this. You mineralise it, inject it into basalt, and it turns into rock. And it's stable for hundreds of thousands of years. I
don't want to. I should probably apologise to Fiona for being brusque, because you are the kind of person she was probably talking about when she said you need to assemble a team of experts. But you're also, the reason why I now withdraw my apology, highlighting what I'm looking for. These are meaningful things that are in place and could be done.
Absolutely. And there are a large number of companies in the UK, startup companies, who are desperate for money to take this forward. If you go to the United States, they have a thing called the IRA. It's tax relief to support people working in green industries.
They do for now, mate. I can't imagine that's going to be in place a year
that's not going to last for long, is it?
No, it really isn't. It really isn't. What are your... I know it's not mystery, but what are your qualifications?
Could I just say, before I say those, one of the problems of the UK business in this kind of geography, if you want to call it that, is that companies are starting up here and they're moving to the US. So we're losing out on the economic opportunity as well. With carbon dioxide at a value of, say, $100 a tonne, we need to remove 600 billion tonnes if we're going to achieve 1.5 degrees by 2050.
So in terms of something that the ordinary man in the street or woman in the street can actually get their head around, I think you're on the right page. I'm the ordinary man in the street. I can get my head around everything that you've said so far. But just tell me what your qualifications are. I don't mean that in an aggressive way. I just want, why do you know so much about this?
Oh, okay, sure. So I work at a thing called the Greenhouse Gas Removal Hub at Imperial College in London, and I've got a PhD in the governance of climate-altering technology.
That's why I asked. There you go.
But
that's it.
Yeah, there are teams of people in the UK who are actually world expert in this.
So why do you think the obvious urgency of the work that you do is not more widely appreciated?
I think a lack of understanding of the scale of the challenge that we face, the importance of what's coming down the pipeline. And Nigel Farage will talk about people on boats coming across the channel, 40,000 perhaps in the year.
Yes.
If we get to 2 degrees, and we're on track for 2.6 at the moment, there will be billions of people on the road.
Who's
flooding north.
Whose current homes have disappeared, have become at best uninhabitable, at worst underwater.
Yeah, they have no access to food. There's no food security. There are water security issues, desertification, and this is already happening. The reason large numbers of people are moving from Central America into America, the United States, is because of climate change.
And Donald Trump has come to power on a platform that denies that it exists and also demonises the people that you've just described. Paul, thank you. I'm a little late for the news. It's the only reason I'm moving on. A couple of people suggesting you deserve a Ray Liotta, but I'm hoping to get quite a few calls today from people as qualified as Paul, so I'm going to hold off on that and just tell you that I wasn't imagining it. The 6 biggest banks in the US have all quit the global banking industry's net zero target setting group with the imminent inauguration of Donald Trump as president, expected to bring political backlash against climate action. So it's not just media owners, it's not just tech platform owners who have done a full 180 from banning Donald Trump from their platform because he's a massive liar, and now bending the knee and doing whatever it is that he wants. It's also the banks. 6 biggest banks in the US no longer even bothering to sign up to the target setting group because they know that under Donald Trump they won't have to. It's got absolutely nothing to do with the climate or the planet and everything to do with the prevailing political opinion, or not even opinion, position, the prevailing political position. And if the prevailing political position is lies, and whether you're Mark Zuckerberg or the head of Goldman Sachs, if you want to get richer, you get in with the liar. That's what's happening now. How many of these people are going to watch the events in California in the same breath, in the same 24-hour window that it's been revealed they've all pulled out of the target setting group, the net zero target setting group, and refuse to join the dots? I'm a little late for Thomas Watts and his headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
You know, it's not quite like that kid in the Sixth Sense. Who am I thinking of? Is it that film about the mathematician when they do the cutaways and there's all the numbers jiggling and juggling in the background? But I do think that things are a little bit more linked than we sometimes allow. So I'm thinking about refugees. And I'm thinking, why aren't you a refugee? Regardless of how pungent your opinions are about refugees and asylum seekers and people who've fled their homes, and how much effort you've been encouraged to put into believing that they're not really fleeing their homes, or they're not really desperate, or they've got no business coming here and they should all stay in France or whatever. But why aren't you a refugee? In a massive scheme of things, if you absolutely break everything down, and remember, you've got to include now the scenes in California, people's homes have disappeared. Why aren't you a refugee? Why aren't I a refugee? Answer is luck. The only thing that distinguishes you from refugees is luck. Their luck is worse than yours at the moment. More than 3 million Americans have moved due to flooding and other extreme weather in the past 20 years. 23,000 Californians arrived in North Carolina between 2021 and 2022, driven by a desire to lower their exposure to the sort of heat of which we're seeing the consequences now. And then what happened in 2024? Hurricane Helene in North Carolina. There's a book called Fire Weather by a guy called John Valen. I haven't read it, but I've got some choice quotes from it. And here's one. There's nowhere to go. You need to stay in the place that means the most to you and figure out how to harden it. So if we want to stop the escalation, Fiona in Kendal tells us we can't reverse it. But if we want to stop it, if we want to improve the current situation, what would we need to do tomorrow? And I'm talking about the king of the world. I'm not talking about doing your recycling, although, as Jim in Hull points out, we may as well give up, because if we can't start by banning single-use plastics and putting things in the right bin without everyone moaning about it, we haven't got a hope. I remember people cared for about a week or so after David Attenborough's documentary. That's the problem, isn't it? But if I made you king of the world, or you made me king of the world, what would we need to do at start of business tomorrow? Oh, and coming up shortly, we're talking to Nazir Afzal, who, of course, is intrinsically involved in the conversations and indeed the reality of prosecuting grooming gang members in this country. And we'll be with him after the 10:45. Ben is in Bristol. Ben, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning, James. Long-time listener, great to be on the show. Of course, there are a huge number of things we need to do, and the previous caller really succinctly summarised those. So this is an and, it's not an or. And of course, we need to use fossil fuels less. But this is another and. Now, even I work within the climate community and in the climate sector. Now, even within the climate sector, it isn't as widely recognised as it should be, as I think it should be, that methane contributes or has contributed 30% of climate change to date. So that's around half a degree. So we know that we're heading now for 1.6 degrees, but half of that degree has come from methane, not carbon dioxide.
Right.
And so that's a point of fact. I think the opportunity that opens up is if we can address methane as well, it is an and, as well as carbon dioxide, we can get a huge win. Now, a lot of work has been shown that if we did everything we could to reduce methane emissions, we could reduce our future temperatures by 0.25 degrees, which is a huge win.
And is it my schoolboy humour that makes me think about bovine flatulence at this point, or not?
It is.
So that's not the major contributor to the creation of methane.
Well, of all global emissions, 60% are anthropogenic, human caused.
Okay.
Agriculture is about a quarter. So, yeah, you're right. And it's more burps than farts, if I'm allowed to use that.
That's the name of my next album.
Exactly. So you're quite right. So enteric methane. Now there are a lot of companies working on this, but it's not what I would do tomorrow, because there are companies working on this already.
Okay. It's interesting. This obsession I have with knitting everything together. There was a story towards the end of last year, wasn't there, about an additive being put into cattle feed that would reduce the amount of methane being produced, and the usual suspects turned it into a conspiracy theory about us being sort of force-fed poisons or something like that, even though the science was absolutely clear.
Absolutely. Of course, and some really good innovation is going on globally to address this. And we don't even need. I don't think we need to address the fake news on that. This will be a real win. But if coming back to your question,
what are we going to announce in the morning? What are we going to announce in the morning?
There already globally there are surveys already going on about where this methane is coming from, the point sources. Now, there's one called Climate Trace, which I think is an Al Gore sponsored website. Absolutely fantastic resource. So if you looked at all the point sources right now, most of them are coming from old coal mines, oil and gas refineries, oil and gas production. If you were to address all of those to the maximum extent, that wouldn't be taking it down to zero, but addressing emissions to the maximum extent, that would be I think that would be a massive cost benefit win, and you would be working to shave that 0.25 degrees off by 2050.
So what does that mean? So I mean, when you say an old coal mine, is it still producing coal?
That's active mines and disused mines emit methane.
How does a disused mine emit methane, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, I don't mind you asking.
Thank you.
It just leaches out of the rock and makes its way up to the surface. Now, if it's high concentration, there are methods to do that. Essentially, you can burn it off in non-scientific. You could combust it. If it's low temp, now 75% of emissions are below 1,000 ppm, parts per million, and there's no current technology to do that. And that's what we're doing in my company. We're trying to develop a system that does low concentration oxidation to get rid of that methane, because this is we think that this is a huge opportunity that we need to be working on. We're not the only ones. There's lots of other people doing this too.
And the absence of political will. I mean, the fact that you don't have a direct line into Downing. Well, maybe you do. You don't have Ed Miliband on speed dial. Why do you think that is? Given that it's almost a zero-sum game, isn't it? You either completely appreciate the urgency or you don't appreciate it at all.
I think, agreed with all that. I think it's also about education. And I mean, there are so many real facts flying around. It's difficult to know where to start. CO2 is obviously the largest contributor. We need to attract that. But I do think, I mean, put this, the IPCC, which is, so the numbers used within the IPCC don't yet give methane as high a weighting as it should, because each molecule of methane is 82.5 times larger than a molecule of CO2. But the numbers in the IPCC, I think they're around 30 to 35. So, given that the science is rapidly evolving itself, it's difficult to keep track of all of these things. Okay. So I think methane is emerging as a real opportunity that maybe we didn't realise 5 or 6 years ago.
It's measurable. It's something you can measure. You can show numbers to people and watch them come down. You understand why I'm asking this question, and I'll explain even further why after you answer it. What are your qualifications in this field?
Well, I've been working in climate in various ways for 20 years. I've worked in promoting electric vehicles. That was my last business, because electric vehicles reduce CO2. And now I work as a consultant in carbon and methane removal.
Pretty well qualified, although Raymond's been in touch and he's used capital letters, Ben, so I don't know whether your qualifications and experience, and Raymond has been in touch to say, do your research and stop spouting dangerous net zero nonsense. And remember, Raymond's used capital letters, so he's obviously very well qualified. Okay,
well, using lowercase, I've spent my whole professional life studying this, so I'm very confident of the fact.
Okay, but Raymond's been on the internet, though. It's important to balance these things, and maybe he's listened to Richard Tice talk about this subject as well. I don't know. 10:47 is the time. After this, I think we'll return to this after 11, because I've got some more calls of similar or comparable calibre to the last couple coming up. But Nazir Afzal is someone whose name that we've mentioned several times on the programme this morning, former chief prosecutor in the northwest of England, a successful prosecutor of the Rochdale grooming gangs, the first prosecutions that were pursued when Keir Starmer was Director of Public Prosecutions. It's this notion of misinformation stroke lies is actually relevant to the climate change conversation, and it's often the same people who are spreading the lies in the context of the grooming gang stories that have grown up since Christmas. Almost everybody, I reckon, who is indulging in the misinformation, not normal people who are horrified by what happened and possibly didn't know much about it before or as much as we did, but claiming things have happened that had not happened, claiming that Jess Phillips or Keir Starmer were complicit in these crimes, as opposed to tireless in their pursuit of the criminals. Those kind of lies, the crossover between climate change denial and those kind of lies is probably close to complete. So I thought we'd catch up with Nazir, find out what he thinks about all this, and we'll do that after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Informative show today, writes Richard. Your contributors are outstanding. You're absolutely right, and you're also right to leave me out of that equation entirely. Another contributor now who is supremely qualified to help us come to a better understanding of what has been, for good or for ill, the biggest story in town, politically speaking, since Christmas. Nazir Afzal is the chief prosecutor in the northwest of England, absolutely intrinsic to the successful prosecution of the Rochdale grooming gangs, and already on the record explaining how Keir Starmer, as director of public prosecutions, created the environment in which not only could those prosecutions happen, but in which other members of grooming gangs who possibly hadn't been properly pursued before could be subsequently prosecuted, so lowering the threshold for prosecution, if you like. And Nazir joins me now, for which I'm very grateful, because you must be incredibly busy. I'll start with a broad question, if I may. Can you make any sense at all about what has happened in this country since Elon Musk started tweeting about an area in which you spent most of your professional life working?
Good morning, James. No, I think you listened to your last conversation. There are people who are experts based on 15 minutes of Googling, and there are people who've actually been doing these cases for 15 years. And for some reason, the 15 minutes of Google is more important and more real than my own experience. There is no doubt in my mind, we're talking about political expediency, we're talking about the exploiting of these terrible crimes for political purposes. And I think it's not mainly public knowledge, but the last few days, James, I've had victims of these abuses ring me up, contact me, reach out to me to tell me that they've been re-traumatized over the last few days. They thought that they were getting better. They've thought that they've reconstructed their lives after the abuse that they terribly suffered 10, 15 years ago. And yet, because of the fact that there's been this regular misinformation and attention in the media and Parliament and everywhere else, they're reliving their experiences. They're losing sleep. They've got no services to go to. They're not getting any help. And some of them are contemplating self-harm. To my mind, that is the most shocking, terrible thing that's come out of this. And it's made me really angry, which is the reason why until today and yesterday I've not been doing any interviews about this, because I wanted to hear from them. I didn't think anybody needed to hear from me, but now I want people to understand the real life consequences of sharing lies, the real life consequence of trying to exploit a situation which has harmed so many people over so many years.
Kemi Badenoch, of course, it emerged after PMQs on Wednesday, is yet to meet any of the victims that you describe, and indeed doesn't feel any particular need to do so, according to one of her spokespeople. Can I take you back, Nazir, to 2012 then, to sort of, if you like, challenge the misinformation, when I think that you, like the rest of us, read some of Andrew Norfolk's reporting in the Times with a growing sense of horror and decided, as a prosecutor working in the CPS, that something had to be done. What happened next?
James, I read, we've been prosecuting these cases for several years, but nobody had made a look at see whether there was a pattern developing. It was Andrew Norfolk in the Times, as you say, wrote about it in January 2011. I became chief in Northwest in May 2011. And then the next month, I became aware of this case that 3 years previously had not been prosecuted, the so-called Rochdale case, because the girl seemed to be unreliable, apparently. The BBC film Three Girls is based on this particular case. And then I decided, well, hang on a minute. The reason why she's not reliable is because we're rubbish at our job. Let's deal with this case. Let's bring this case to court and provide her with all the support and all the other victims with the support. And so I reversed the decision that had been taken by others to not charge. I charged these men. 9 men were convicted in May 2012. And it was a massive change in the way we operated. We didn't lower the threshold. We realized that applying the same tests to children abused in these circumstances was not right. For example, the test was if she returns to her perpetrator, you should question whether you should prosecute. These girls were so manipulated by their perpetrators that of course they returned. The test was if they are inconsistent when they give their evidence, they mess about, they say various different things, that shouldn't be prosecuted. The reason why they were inconsistent is they were plied with drugs, they were plied with drink, and they were being abused. So using the old test didn't work. We had to change that. And Kira and I changed that. We changed the policy, the guidelines that we had in place. We put in place a national panel, which I chaired, he chaired. We made sure that other parts of the country could bring their cases, that we could revisit them. And we went from a situation where we were pretty poor, and by we, I mean every agency was pretty poor at tackling this, to by 2014, when Keir left and when I left prosecuting, we had the highest conviction rate for child sexual abuse in British history. I have no idea how that can be seen as failure.
I don't suspect frustration comes close to describing some of your reactions to the events of this week. Not just the political expediency on this side of the Atlantic that you describe, but for somebody with the weight, the heft, and the wealth of Elon Musk to be not only completely misrepresenting the reality of your own professional life, but also becoming a sort of Tommy Robinson tribute act.
I mean, I began to question my own existence. It was like
I can see you, Nazir. You're definitely there.
It was like talking to flat earthers,
Yes.
Because they had no semblance of what we had done. The data speaks for itself. The fact that victims and survivors were finally getting justice was a brilliant thing. Yes, there's much more to do. Having another inquiry, when quite frankly we've had a £200 million 7-year inquiry, which tells us what to do but hasn't been done, was simply a deflection. What we have to realize is that people like Elon Musk and others were just simply focused on their own narcissistic lifestyles and making sure that they were important, when in fact the only people that were important are the victims and survivors. And
I'm grateful to you for reminding us of that. I think the media, myself included, is sometimes a little bit remiss when it comes to focusing on who should be completely at the centre of this story. A word, if you would, on you've mentioned that there's no need for, or in your view, there's no need for a national inquiry, but the failure to implement Alexis Jay's recommendations, I mean, is that something that you think the Labour government could have done quicker, given that the Tory party didn't do anything at all?
I think I'm glad they're committed to it now, and they're 6 months in. You mentioned the Americans. I have done American media this last 2 days,
right?
Because I knew that they had no idea what. So I wanted them to know what I've just told you.
What sort of questions are they asking you?
What actually
happened?
What is happening? How bad is it? Are the children of United Kingdom outliers? Are they being abused in ways that nobody else in the world is? I reminded them that 20% of American adults say that they were sexually abused as children. So it's a global issue. It's not a British issue. But I think it's important to always recognise that we could do more. The inquiry, the 20 recommendations, in particular the main one around mandatory reporting. So if you see something, hear something, it's that do something about it. Keir spoke about that. I was in a meeting with him, a conference. He spoke and said, "I'm in total support of mandatory reporting in 2012." Right. So my point is, we know what works. We need to deliver it. We want to prevent future harm. We want children to be safe. Deliver on what we know works.
You are a British man of Pakistani heritage. How do the comments of somebody like Robert Jenrick land? I mean, even if you hadn't worked in this field so effectively, how do you feel about his conflation of... Go on.
Well, apparently I'm medieval. He says that my background, or because of my heritage, I'm medieval in some way, as is Sadiq Khan, as is Muhammad Ali, or anybody else for that matter. Look, he needs a history lesson. When Europe was going through the medieval times, the Islamic world was giving the world maths, medicine, arts and culture. It was teaching, it created the first universities, etc., etc. just simply suggesting, or more than suggesting, I mean, there's no doubt in my mind we're talking about racism here. All he's doing is saying, look at them over there. They're the problem. Well, Simon Bailey, who was the former police head of child sexual abuse, said that grooming of the type that we're talking about is only 3%. It's not only, but it is 3% of child sexual abuse. 97% of it is not localized grooming. Most of it, as you've said on previous programs, 88% of it is by British white men. We call it grooming gangs when it's British Pakistanis. We call it paedophile rings when it's white men. And we're only focusing on grooming gangs when it's the paedophile rings that are causing most harm. It is just causing a situation where people are not safe. And it's dangerous, James, because you're saying to a girl, beware of the brown man, when you're actually 40 times more likely to be abused by a white man.
Finally, Nazir, there is one element of misinformation which you have a sort of unfortunate role in, isn't there? Which is this resurrected so-called memo in which it was claimed that the Home Office spoke about lifestyle choices in the case of some of these victims, going right back, I think, to 2008. And the only identifiable mention of a Home Office document supposedly advising police not to intervene because victims had made an informed choice about their sexual behaviour appears to have been an interview that you gave back in 2008. What's happened there?
I was told police officers were trying to explain why they had not carried out any actions or they had not done enough to protect children. They told me, or some of them told me, that they were guided by some guidance that arrived from the Home Office. The reality is that they were simply explaining or justifying their behaviours based on some information they've given. Unfortunately, I don't have the resources to research every single circular the Home Office issued. I simply repeated what they told me. The reality is, however, to give you an example, a young girl, 14-year-old girl, is in a taxi headquarters every night. Police officers approach her, ask her why she's there. She says, because I can't go home, I'm not safe at home. The officer accepts what she says, that she feels safe in this environment, and leaves her. That officer says, I did that because I listened to her and I was told by somebody somewhere that I need to listen to her and act upon her belief, rather than doing the right thing, which is take her away and ensure that she is properly interviewed to see whether or not she can be made safe. Now, that is simply officers and police officers trying to justify their behaviour. I'm guilty of repeating what they told me. Absolutely right. And this has gone all the way up to Elon Musk claiming that this actual circular, which does not exist and never existed, according to the best efforts of pretty much everybody qualified to inquire, it did not exist and it never existed. But even Elon Musk is now claiming that it's proof that Gordon Brown was somehow complicit in. Well, Gordon Brown was not complicit. Bizarrely, I've spoken to Gordon Brown this week. No. Gordon Brown had anything to do with grooming or localized grooming or child sexual abuse. No, neither did Jackie Smith, who was the Home Office Minister at the time. The point is that policing was poor at that time, and police officers who were not acting upon the information they received, some of them, unfortunately, gave their justification, which was not actually something that existed.
Final question. You don't have to answer this. It's a theory that's popped into my mind, I don't think for the first time this week, but it certainly gathered a bit of weight this week. There were clearly, and the report has found, that various reports have found, that there were clearly claims, credible claims, that some of these investigations were not pursued for fear of causing racial tension, for fear of being accused of racism on the part of the police. But sometimes listening to some of the evidence given, I wonder whether that comes close to being a cop-out. So when you're asked as a police officer why you failed, for example, to look after a young girl in the situation like the one you described, if you say, I was worried about being called racist, you're off the hook for not doing your job very well.
I don't disagree with you. I think people were giving all sorts of excuses, whether it was a circular that they may have seen, whether it was racism, whether they weren't resourced properly. But you know, policing was well resourced in the Blair government. So none of these excuses stood up. But as you say, I'm never a believer in conspiracies. I'm a believer in fact that people would rather you think of a conspiracy when actually they were just incompetent.
And the biggest institutional failure, or the driver of that incompetence, would be not treating these girls and young women with the decency that they deserved.
I think also, James, that people haven't really talked about the class issue here.
Yes.
These girls were working class. They were from broken, troubled backgrounds. Some of them told me that the reaction to them was snobbishness. Yeah, they were treated as if they were lesser beings because of their working class backgrounds. So I think that had as much impact as anything else, quite frankly. We overcomplicated. Women and girls were not listened to, are not listened to, are not acted upon, and they are still suffering in all sorts of environments, not just in the UK.
Nazir, thank you.
You're welcome.
Nazir Afzal there, the former chief prosecutor in the northwest of England, and as you've heard, a key driver, along with Sir Keir Starmer, of changes to the process by which members of so-called grooming gangs were pursued and prosecuted. But of course, Billy Bunch of numbers. Well, you can't do that anymore. You can't do Billy Bunch of numbers on Twitter with a bulldog avatar, because the owner of the entire platform, who might as well have a bulldog avatar, and was knocking around last night with the leader of the AfD, the far-right German political party. He apparently knows better. It's 11:06.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10 minutes after 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. At least one more call on the climate change conversation inspired by the apocalyptic scenes. I don't know that I don't overuse the word apocalyptic, but it's probably an overused word. But I think it applies in this case. And we may take some more calls on that. We may not. I don't know. But the question that we're asking is, if I was king of the world, imagine if you've just tuned in now. I knew this guy was arrogant, but what's he done now? He's made himself king of the world. Or if you were king of the world, there you go, you see. And you really wanted to deal with the escalating temperatures, which everybody except people who use capital letters in their text of the programme, or indeed think that politicians with a track record of being wrong about everything are somehow right about climate science that they have no understanding or knowledge of whatsoever. Apart from them, everybody knows that the temperature is going up as a consequence of our activity. If you were in charge of the world, the planet, what would you do first tomorrow morning? What would you announce immediately in order to start the process of improvement? 11:11 is the time. Alex is in Newcastle. Alex, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on.
Very well.
It's a really interesting question. If I was king of the world, the first thing I would do is dramatically reduce the cost of public transport, because that's both popular and it will make a big difference and get less people
I'm going to
driving.
give you a free pass on the usual question a politician would be asked, which would be, how will you pay for it? But you're
that's
right.
my next
Just
point.
get everybody onto public transport. London has the best public transport in Europe, and yet we've still got congested roads. I was reading a brilliant piece by John Elledge yesterday about this, and it's just behavioural.
Yeah. So my next point is exactly about the cost.
Oh.
So then you close the tax loopholes for oil and gas companies, and you tax them properly, and you get them to pay for some of these changes.
Okay, that
and
works,
that's
because
actually
you're
an
not
investment.
saying we're going to shut them down overnight. You're acknowledging that they're going to have to carry on doing what they're doing for at least for now, but we know the size of their profits. We're going to be taking a lot more of those. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so there's short-term goals here and there's long-term goals.
Yes.
So after that, insulation. Double glazing is the cheapest, most effective insulation that we can do. So roll out double glazing around the country. Then we look at renewables. We're an island. We have a lot of potential for tidal and offshore wind in particular, far more than most other countries in Europe. So absolutely, we can use that. Energy bills lower. That is hopefully making us a lot more popular as a government. And then with all of this, a lot of these are investments, so that will actually create massive profits over the long term. Then citizens' assemblies in more local areas in order to try and make sure that they're kind of like, a jury for trials. So you have random people selected who listen to experts in that field and then make decisions on a more local level. And then, to be honest, if I was king of the world, I still want to stay king of the world and try and make these other changes like that. But in the real world, hopefully everywhere would have citizens' assemblies, and then you can make these changes depending on experts.
Yeah, and you make it sound at least feasible, which is the biggest challenge of all. I think it is as well, but it's a mystery to me. Well, it's not a mystery to me, but it is. It's clear that one of the obstacles to action is a perception of unfeasibility, a perception, it's a mountain so huge, there's no point starting the climb.
Yeah, absolutely. But that just, delays the problem, makes everything so much worse.
Well, of course it does. Of course it does. And I haven't really done this today. We may do it next week. But while you're here, the disconnect not just politically, but also among normal people, between the scenes that we saw in Spain last year, the scenes that we're seeing in California now, and the science? I mean, how do you account for that?
I mean, it's a long conversation. There's a lot of different aspects to that. Social media, political beliefs is actually a large part of it. But also, I feel like science is not communicating this as well as it should be. It's like, this may be impacted by the climate crisis. Maybe it's increased by 20%. Maybe we've passed 1.5 degrees, but we won't know until 20 years have passed. I think we just need to be straight up and clear and say that the climate crisis is a massive emergency. It is making all of these weather events more common, harsher, and it is killing people around the world and making people refugees. And so let's put all of that aside, of this debate of whether or not it's happening, and let's move on with the actual climate action points. Let's make public transport free and actually make a profit over 8 years by doing that. Let's switch to renewable energy. Let's close all these tax loopholes. Let's get on with the job, basically, is what we need to do. Get onto our work.
And you know, a rare word of comfort, or not comfort, support for politicians from me now, Alex, as I'm sure you will agree. The abuse that is directed at politicians who try even to tinker at the edges of what you're describing, you know. Admittedly, when Boris Johnson brought in ULEZ, he didn't get anything like the abuse and vitriol that Sadiq Khan got when he pressed on with plans to extend it. I'll leave you to wonder why the kind of people who are inflating the grooming gang conversations and denying climate change might have a particular problem with Sadiq Khan as opposed to Boris Johnson when it comes to the implementation of similar policies. But if you are a politician determined to work in this field, you don't just paint a target on your back on social media. You also, of course, come under sustained fire from very, very well-funded, albeit secretly funded organisations that have managed to infiltrate almost every level of the UK and US media. And that's really interesting, because back when all of this felt a little bit more theoretical, and the idea of having somebody intoning drill baby drill moving into the White House even as California burned, when that would have made us laugh, when we'd have found that too ridiculous to contemplate, and I was busy examining the misinformation that led to Brexit, it was climate change that I ended up beginning with. It was the idea of people like Nigel Lawson turning up on the BBC to debate with actual scientists about climate change. And of course, that has its roots in Tufton Street as well, in precisely the same places that brought you Liz Truss and her economic miracles. I have some more news for you about Liz Truss's attempts to get the lawyers to tell Keir Starmer to stop accusing her of crashing the economy. And if you were laughing at yesterday's interventions from the strangest Prime Minister this country has ever seen, then I guarantee you'll be laughing at today's. The time is 11:17.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 19 minutes after 11. It's odd, you know. I find it reassuring. I come off air feeling better than I did when I came on air, when we're in times of peril, such as the ones that we are currently in politically. I hope you do too. I presume that's why you choose to spend some of your mornings with me. So you end up coming, even though we find ourselves examining together pretty grim tidings, but it's making sense of things that appear to be insensible that I think can seem reassuring. So I'll return to familiar territory briefly before I tell you what we're talking about next. Because I mentioned climate change and lies about climate change being at the root of the sort of epidemic of misinformation that brought us Brexit and has now carried right through to the grooming gangs conversation, that the same people that brought you Brexit and Boris Johnson and Liz Truss and Donald Trump and all the rest of it are continuing to inflate. Do you remember Alex Jones? Not the lovely lady who presents the One Show, but the absolute head case who accused the Sandy Hook, the parents of children murdered in the Sandy Hook massacre, of being liars and fraudsters and actors. A man who looked at a massacre in a school, a massacre of the innocents in a school, and decided to tell lies about it in order to make money. You'll remember he ran an operation that Nigel Farage appeared on frequently. So you could almost sound like a conspiracy theorist if you weren't dealing exclusively in facts. Farage continued to appear on it long after Alex Jones had accused the families of murdered children, massacred children, of being liars. Elon Musk, another name that's popped up a lot recently, brought Alex Jones back onto Twitter after he bought it. He allowed the man who had not only maligned the memories of massacred children, but also insulted and libelled their parents in unimaginable ways back onto the platform for what Nigel Farage would no doubt continue to describe as the exercise of free speech. He tweeted about climate change yesterday. He described the fires in California as part of a globalist plot, which of course has anti-Semitic undertones, a globalist plot to wage economic warfare and deindustrialize the United States before triggering global collapse. So Musk seems relatively mild when he claims that the fire department in California prioritized diversity, equity and inclusion principles over saving lives and homes, and that's why the state is burning. But Alex Jones blamed a globalist plot to wage economic warfare and deindustrialize the United States before triggering global collapse, to which Elon Musk replied, true. So that's the man you're trusting on Keir Starmer and Jess Phillips, Gordon Brown and Britain, your sovereign United Kingdom. That's the man you're trusting. The man who is now riding shotgun for Alex Jones. And of course, the British equivalent, the pound shop version of these characters is Nigel Farage, who remains in possession of season tickets for every media outlet in the country, despite never mind being asked about why Brexit's gone so badly wrong and what happened to his promise to leave the country if it failed, but his association with these people, his reverence for these people, his admiration of these people, his collaboration with these disgusting, dishonest individuals. I don't care how rich you are. Being disgusting and dishonest is objective. It doesn't change according to the size of your fortune. The fires in California are part of a globalist plot to wage economic warfare and deindustrialize the United States before triggering global collapse. True, Elon Musk replied. Who was the Tory politician who described Elon Musk as having saved humanity the other day? Did you see that story? You see, this is what I mean. I thought this was going to end after the last election. I thought my lonely job of pointing out, I hate doing it, it doesn't make me very popular in some circles, pointing out how appalling the interviewing of politicians is, because they never ever bring to the table back references to things that these politicians have said and done in the past. So there's a Tory this week, you'll remind me, I'll just check my inbox, this is called crowdsourcing. There's a Tory this week who essentially described Elon Musk as having saved the world by buying Twitter. A senior Tory as well. His name will come to me shortly, ideally via my inbox or my producer. But Elon Musk, the man who apparently saved the world, according to a senior Tory, is of the view that the fires currently raging in California are part of a globalist plot to wage economic warfare and deindustrialize the United States before triggering global collapse. So when people like Kemi Badenoch bend the knee to people like Elon Musk, they are, in my view, absolutely rendering it crucial that the next time they're interviewed by a politician, they get asked about the things that Elon Musk says, does and believes. Instead of just being allowed to say, oh, he's a great force for good, or what did Farage say? He's a hero. He's a hero, is he? A bloke who believes that the fires in California are part of a globalist plot to wage economic warfare and deindustrialize the United States before triggering global collapse. That's the rhetoric of 1930s Germany. Andrew Griffiths is his name. Thank you to my inbox. Quite a few of you paying a little bit more attention than I was. So Andrew Griffiths tweeted that Elon Musk had saved the world. Next time you have the misfortune of interviewing Andrew Griffiths, just read him some of this stuff. And the other thing I'd ask, if I ever had the dubious pleasure of interviewing Elon Musk, was that if you were the stepfather to a child from the age of about 3, if you were the stepfather to a little girl, and then when that little girl became an adult, you had 2 children with her, your own stepdaughter, would that qualify as grooming? I would ask Elon Musk, while reminding him that that's exactly what his own dad did. Had a baby with his own stepdaughter, who had been I think, in his family from a very, very young age. What's grooming, do you think? I don't know. It's just a question. InfoWars, of course, was the name of the Alex Jones platform upon which Nigel Farage inevitably had a season ticket. So, I you know what I mean? I thought maybe I'd be able to dial down the lonely business of having to point all this stuff out on a regular basis. But you turn on the BBC on Sunday morning, they won't mention any of this to you. They won't remind you. You could invite Nigel Farage into your studio for 40 minutes and not even ask him about Brexit in 2025. An absolutely extraordinary state of affairs. Never mind asking him about his associations with Alex Jones or Elon Musk's view that California is burning because of globalist conspiracies. It's just, it's insane. And it comes some days, it slaps harder, doesn't it? Because oddly, the conversation about climate change has reminded me of all this. The conversation about climate change is constantly underpinned by the question of how can people believe this rubbish? How can they believe this bilge? How can Raymond be texting me in capital letters to tell me that all of the supremely qualified people queuing up to contribute to this programme don't know what they're talking about? And he does. And net zero is nonsense because Nigel Lawson or Richard Tice or Billy Bunch of Numbers told him that it was. It's Michael Gove and the denigration of experts, isn't it? It's the BBC inviting people on from Tufton Street to put forward positions without revealing who's paying them to put them forward. I mean, crikey, someone should write a book about it. Hey? It's coming up to 11:30. Sorry, I just wanted to get that off my chest because I know sometimes you feel, as I do, that everybody's going mad. And you know that Orwell quote that I almost always misremember or misrepresent. There is truth and there is untruth. And if you can hold on to the truth, even if you are the only one, you will not go mad. I'm going to get it right today for once, actually. There was truth and there was untruth. And if you clung to the truth, even against the whole world, you were not mad. So there it is. It's coming up to 11:30. In the next hour, I want to talk about Stuart Hogg, former Scotland Rugby Union captain. More pertinently, perhaps, I want to talk about his former wife, Gillian Hogg. He appeared in court on the 4th of November to plead guilty to a single charge of domestic abuse. He's now received his sentence. We'll have a look at the sentencing. But what I want to look at even more closely is the difference, if that's the right word to use, between physical violence in a domestic setting and emotional violence. And I wonder whether we still lag behind on this subject, the experiences of victims and survivors. I wonder whether our courts, and in this case it's the Scottish courts, fail to understand that emotional violence can be every bit as harrowing, as horrible and as horrific as physical violence. So we're going to get into that story after this, and it may involve me asking you very cautiously to share some of your experiences of domestic abuse that didn't involve kicks and punches, but was, in your view, every bit as bad as if it had. 0345 6060 973. Thomas Watts is here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 11, one of my irregular visits to the extremities of my inbox. Graham in Liverpool, thank you for your kind words. Dear James, he writes, fantastic show this morning. Keep up your good work. Don't let any of them silence you. Gary, meanwhile, has been in touch to say, I hope Elon gets James in his sights. LBC will ditch him in a heartbeat. How wonderful that will be. So, I mean, mate, you're not supposed to admit that you love being lied to. You're supposed to pretend that you believe that it's true. But yeah, I guess if you're Gary, the idea of a world in which there are no mirrors would be very, very appealing and very, very attractive. And who knows, Gary, maybe one day you will wake up in a world where there are no mirrors. It's 11:34, and we turn our attention next to a story about which I know very little, happily. It's odd the things that pop into your mind, isn't it? Have you ever heard me mention, I know I have mentioned it on air, one of my closest friends, one of my favourite people on the planet, who we realised, I mean, about 2 years later, had been in the foothills of a coercive relationship. And the thing she always remembered was her boyfriend at the time running his hand up her back whenever he said goodbye to her, when she was leaving the house, to make sure that she was wearing a bra. He had an obsession with the idea of her not wearing a bra in order to somehow attract the attention of men. And he would physically check her back. I don't know why that pops into my mind. I think it's a reminder that we don't always recognise behaviours as toxic when they're right in front of us. There's no mistaking the toxicity of Stuart Hogg's behaviour towards his own wife. He is the former captain of the Scottish Rugby Union team, and he was sentenced yesterday after pleading guilty to abusing his estranged wife over the course of 5 years. And what I think is, for want of a better word, interesting about this story is that there are no allegations, as far as I can tell. I'm confident there are no allegations of violence in the conventional physical sense of the word. How would we have reacted 25 years ago if domestic abuse charges had been levelled against someone who'd never laid a finger on his wife? I don't know. So it's not a rhetorical question. I don't know. Bearing in mind that not that long ago in this country, it was still legally impossible to rape your own wife, because British law contended that if she was your wife, you could have sex with her whenever you wanted, whether she wanted to or not. That's I don't know whether Robert Jenrick considers that to be medieval, in which case we're all part of his recent categorisations. But 25 years ago, a case of domestic abuse that involved no violence, no physical violence. Would we have bought that? Do you think? Would that have actually happened? I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't think that it would. But it happens now. Stuart Hogg pleaded guilty to a single charge of domestic abuse of his ex-partner. He admitted shouting and swearing, or exercising freedom of speech, perhaps, as some politicians might contend, tracking her movements and sending her messages that were alarming and distressing in nature. He hasn't been incarcerated. He's been sentenced to a community payback order with 1 year of supervision. So two elements to this conversation in a way. The first is, I wonder if he would have been sent to jail if he had battered her, if he had behaved like that Reform Limited MP behaved towards his girlfriend in his youth, if he'd actually kicked her head in. You presume, like the Reform MP, like Nigel's colleague, you presume he would have been locked up. But I don't know. But it means that we're recognising the severity of the crime, but not, I don't think, considering it to be as severe as physical violence. And that may well be the right thing to do. That's the question that I'm going to ask you. There's another story in the news today, which was on our list, but which I don't think we'll be talking about, where James Timpson is talking about hiring prisoners and pointing out that about 2/3 of prisoners probably shouldn't be in jail in the first place. So one of the best ways to bring prison numbers down, of course, would be to stop locking up people for whom it has no social or personal benefit. But that's not an element of this conversation. It's just something I thought you might be interested in. Have a listen to some of the things that he did. He used an app to track his wife. Right there, questioning her constantly about her whereabouts while she was dropping the children off. That is something that I think 30, 40 years ago, someone might even have described it as romantic. Oh, he wants to know where I am all the time. He wants to know where, he won't let me out of his sight. But of course, the technology now means that he really won't let you out of his sight. And why does he want to know where you are all the time? Because he thinks that you're cheating on him, because he doesn't trust you, because he's so insecure. Is that the reason or not? What is the reason? Why does he need to know where you are all the time? Surely it's because he doesn't trust you. I don't know. Again, I'm thinking out loud. It's a phone-in show. Bombarded her when she went out for the night with text messages to a degree that everybody she was with noticed. On one occasion, he sent so many messages to her, in excess of 200 texts over the course of a few hours, despite her asking him to leave her alone. She had a panic attack. Police were called last February because he was shouting and swearing. They took him into custody, placed him on a bail order and told him not to contact her or go near the family home. So we're looking at shouting and swearing, tracking, stalking. You can stalk your own wife, I think. You can stalk your own partner, constantly berating her for not being fun when he was going out on drinking binges, sending more than 200 text messages to her within a few hours. He has a 5-year non-harassment order. I think the first one that's ever been handed down by a Scottish sheriff. And, oh no, that's because he'd already breached his bail conditions. That was last December. There was one night, his bail conditions prevented him from doing this, but one night in June, she received 28 texts from him, even though he wasn't supposed to contact her at all. So he'd already been banned from approaching or contacting her, and he'd already breached that order. There are two questions. The first is the classic question on this programme. What's it like? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I want to know, and I want to, I think, and I may review this depending on what you say to the producer. I think we want to focus on people who have not been victims of domestic violence, physical domestic violence, but have been victims of domestic abuse. Is it as bad? Can I say that, or does that sound crass? Is it as bad? So I suspect it probably is. Bruises heal. You know, that old, one of the biggest lies I think we tell ourselves as children is that sticks and stones may break our bones, but words will never hurt us. It depends, I suppose, what the words are, how loudly they're being screamed in your face, whether you can feel the flecks of spittle landing on your own forehead as he rages and rants at you. Why would he want to know where she was all the time? What is that like? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Do you feel that these kind of behaviours are in some ways... The reason I ask about whether they are, quotes, as bad, end quotes, as more obvious violence, more obvious physical violence, is because of the question of whether or not it is a mistake to hand down a softer sentence, if you like. I'll probably review the thing about exclusively non-physical, because I can't imagine there are that many cases where it hasn't crossed over into physical violence as well. I don't know. Well, you tell me. The phone lines are open, okay? So question number one, what happened? I mean, where's the point at which you realise this isn't normal? I meant what I said. I've heard people say it. You know, it's so sweet. He likes to know where I've got a new boyfriend. He likes to know where I am all the time because he loves me so much. When did you begin to realise? What was he doing that made you realise that this wasn't normal? And then I suppose there's various points on this path. When did you begin to realise it wasn't normal? When did you begin to realise it was profoundly wrong, borderline criminal? And then we remove the borderline and move into criminal. And then the question of, should it be punished as severely as physical violence? Should emotional violence, which is my phrase, domestic abuse, but emotional violence, be punished as severely as physical violence? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I don't think it's irresponsible to ask why, because I suggested to a female colleague it's all about insecurity. It's all about thinking that she's, I mean, completely unfounded. Some men are like that. They're constantly convinced that their partner's going to cheat on them, so they need to know. They need constant reassurance. Send me a picture of the room that you're in. Who are you with? What are you doing? Where are you? Tracking your car, tracking your phone. I just believe, I mean, that is about self-esteem being so, I think, my untutored eye thinks it's about self-esteem being so low that you think that your partner is going to see other people. There's almost self-loathing attached to that. But I could be wrong. Well, I mean, why does it happen? 0345 6060 973. What's it like when it does happen? What made you realise that line between the person that you love or loved behaving in a way that you could construe as endearing, but you realised people around you told you, a line was crossed, something happened, and you realised that it's not about dedication or romance, or it's something else, something really ugly. And is it as ugly as physical violence? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's 11:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:48 is the time. I don't know if you were listening earlier when we were talking to Nazir Afzal, a former chief prosecutor in the Northwest, who of course led the line, and also a man of a British man of Pakistani heritage. So one of the people we need to keep an eye on, possibly even deport, according to Robert Jenrick. But he mentioned that he's been speaking to some of the victims whose abusers he prosecuted in recent days, and that they've been re-traumatized by the political rhetoric and the lies, of course, being spouted by people like Elon Musk. And it just came back to me when I was reading this from someone who's asked to remain anonymous. You don't realise until you leave, James. I still feel deep inside that it was all my fault. You get so gaslit and so stressed that it impacts your memory and sense of reality. I can't call in because I'm already sobbing just listening to this. It's like taking who you are away and it never quite comes back. We're talking about I don't want to say the differences, but the distinctions between emotional violence and physical violence. And the question, which I'm very conscious of potential crassness, of whether you should punish the emotional violence as severely as we correctly punish physical violence. As some people would argue, we don't punish physical domestic abuse as severely as we should. But does the emotional violence deserve more stringent sentencing? And I ask because Stuart Hogg, the former Scotland rugby union captain, has received a community payback order after pleading guilty to abusing his estranged wife over the course of 5 years. Janet is in Kingston. Janet, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello,
yes,
Janet.
yes, I'd lived with somebody doing this to me for about 30 years.
Good Lord.
Before I had the courage to go.
Yes.
And it ended about 15 years ago, so it's a long while now, but I'm still feel very triggered by hearing about it.
What sort of things did you endure, Janet?
We were very young when we got together, and he would control what I wore, where I went, who I could see. Virtually everything, my whole life was ruled by him. I don't know why, but we ended up getting married. I don't know what it was that I didn't have the courage to walk away at that age. We had children. I think we stayed together because of the children. I couldn't, walk away with them as young children.
Yeah, of course. But
I kind of put up with it. He the worst of it all was he would ignore me. If I did something he didn't like, he would ignore me. And when I say ignore me, it would go on for weeks. He wouldn't say a word to me for weeks. The longest was 6 months.
What, without him acknowledging your existence?
Yes, I would sort of serve the dinner up and I wouldn't get a reply, answer to the questions. I would be blanked, totally ignored. If other people were around us, he would talk to them. And
would they not notice?
Somehow,
or would they?
They didn't notice. Nobody seemed to notice.
You wouldn't, would you?
I covered it up. Covered it.
How did you cover it up? Oh, fine line, I think. You could tell it was getting a bit clicky towards the end. I'd like to talk a bit more to Janet if we can. If we could try and get her back. Unless she didn't sound like she was regretting ringing in or being triggered by some of the memories. But we'll just make sure she's okay at least. 11:51 is the time. Bev's in Nottingham. Bev, what made you pick up the phone?
Oh, yeah. I was impelled to really ring and tell you about my family's experience with an emotionally abusive man in the family. My niece's partner, who she had 3 children with, was very emotionally abusive, and we observed coercive control.
Well, we didn't even know that phrase a few years ago, did we, Bev? But I suppose we know now what the behaviours.
Yeah, we definitely do. And sadly, I think there's a lot of women who are probably experiencing emotional abuse now and coercive control who aren't even aware of it themselves. They see it as love, or they see it as, caring. It seems a little bit old-fashioned to
I'm interested in that, and I'm interested in what it looks like from the outside. I think we've got Janet back, so we'll go back to Janet after you for the inside view. But how from the outside, how do you know that it's wrong, even when the victim, doesn't?
I think just those signs of. I mean, for a start, my niece was isolated eventually to the point where she could only do what he sort of allowed her to do, and that had a huge effect on the family. And when
you say to her, "What should we go shopping this weekend?" and she says, "I can't," what reason does she? He won't let me, or he doesn't want me to, or he likes to have me at home. What sort of thing? What would happen?
She would. Eventually, she just made lots of excuses that weren't related to him because we challenged her, and I actually challenged him to the point where my sister was getting married, and I had a phone call from her to say that unfortunately I wasn't going to be invited to the wedding because her daughter, my niece, and her abusive partner refused to go and let the children take part in the wedding
if you were there.
I was going to be there, So
you'd been identified by him as a problem, whereas perhaps her mum, he'd managed to reel into his.
Well, I think as a mum, you don't want to let go and you don't want to say too much, and we're really sort of tread carefully, don't we, with our children? We don't want to lose touch with them. But and I know we're talking about emotional abuse, but sadly this didn't end well at all. It went on to physical abuse, and my niece lost her life. So
he killed her?
I can't say that legally.
Oh, okay, but she's dead.
Yeah, and he's in prison for a long time.
I don't know what to ask you now, because I'm so conscious of where the line is between curiosity and prurience. But what does her mum think? I mean, because I don't want to say you've been proved right.
No, and do you know what?
And nor do you.
You were spot on. I felt like that. I felt obviously that horrible. I knew this was coming. I sensed this was coming. It doesn't make it any better.
No.
It doesn't make it any better at all. She's got 3 children. She had 3 children, and their lives. I think it's important to say that children's lives, whether it's emotional, verbal, physical, financial abuse, it just wrecks.
And it's not. I think the weird thing is, I suppose, for those of us on the outside, is for the warped mind of the abuser, it's never going to be achieved, is it? Whatever he thinks needs to be done in order for him to be happy or for him to be secure, it's impossible. I mean, there's nothing which, from the victim's point of view, is the ultimate torture, because it will never stop. You will never be able to do, even if you become, as Janet described, you are ignored for 6 months. It's never going to stop. Bev, I'm so sorry. As you say, legal considerations to take into account there clearly. But goodness me, that line between what is, quotes, normal or loving and what is the precise opposite, you'd think would be really clear, but it obviously isn't. I'm going to go back to Janet, whose phone line went down, and we're just talking about being completely ignored for 6 months. Where did, Janet, the seed of knowledge that this was completely wrong, where and when did it start growing during that 30-year relationship? I mean, completely wrong, not just, he's got some odd habits, or do you see what I mean? The impetus to finally leave.
I think for me, it was, I finally had enough when I realised that my children were becoming young adults, and we could have a normal negotiation or a compromise or a proper discussion about things. But my husband actually was still like a 5-year-old in his emotional intelligence. I think that's when I finally realised that this is just ridiculous, Jane. You've got to get out here. It's just not, Janet shouldn't have to put up with him any longer.
Did the children get involved? Did the children get involved ever?
No, it was. No. I think it was really. I thought we'd hidden it from them, but actually, having spoken to my son since, he said he knew what was going on. He could see how his father was acting towards me, and it upset him. But he couldn't. He was a great big bloke. You're scared. You're embarrassed. You don't want people to know that, because in my working life, I was a person that could stand up to bullies. I was the person that other people came to for support.
Really?
And yet in my own life, I just couldn't do it.
God, stereotypes are so unhelpful, aren't they? So we've all possibly got this image in our head of the mousy little woman who wouldn't say boo to a goose, and that is categorically not you.
No, it was not me. I mean, most people were absolutely gobsmacked, if I can use that term, when I finally walked away. They could not believe it. I think the only person that had any inkling was my mum.
Right.
And she'd kept kind of quiet and supported me quietly, but she said she wasn't surprised, so she kind of knew things were going to.
And because this might be helpful to people listening who haven't made the move that you've made. How easy was it to leave? How did that process go?
Not easy at all.
I know.
But at the end of the day, I've had a couple of women friends say to me, I want to do the same thing, but I can't. And I've said, well, why not? Because one of them said because of money. And I said I had no money. I was giving him most of my money to support the children who still, as young adults, were still living at home. And I felt I should still support the mortgage and that kind of thing. So I had very little to live on, but I still had peace of mind. That kind of was worth more than anything.
You've preempted my final question, which is: can you remember the moment, if there was a moment, when I don't know if are you still there?
Yes.
Oh, good. You're not driving a bin lorry at the moment, are you, Janet?
No, something's going past, though. I'm just going to,
No, don't worry. I just thought you might have been the fella yesterday who was driving a gritter. But can you remember the moment where you allowed yourself to relax, where you actually felt for the first time, my goodness me, it's over? Was there a single moment or not?
No, I still get anxiety.
Of course you do.
I have to come across him at family things.
Yeah.
I met him about 8 years after we'd actually separated, and he was still blaming me for his behaviour towards his new girlfriend.
Wow.
I've recently had some counselling because I had a bereavement.
Yes.
And when I got to talk about this and I actually said that sentence, the counsellor said so you were married to a narcissist. Yeah. And I'd never, ever, ever thought of that before. I'd never made that link and put that label on him.
Incapable of acknowledging anybody else's feelings or reality almost. It's about the entire, like a planet around which everything else must revolve.
So now, if I ever have to meet him, and I sometimes do, I feel, sick, really. I don't want to be in his company because I still feel that I'm going to be put back into that position. I still can't be strong enough to just treat him like I would any other person that was bullying me.
And yet you've done the biggest thing of all, the hardest thing of all, which is to cut ties and walk away.
Yes. Strange,
I think you sound incredibly strong for what it's worth.
Thank you.
I really do, and so does everybody listening to this programme. And I think you probably will have inspired some people who recognise some of what you described to acknowledge that they shouldn't be putting up with this anymore either. But goodness me, what an absolute kicker that is. It's your fault that I'm behaving like a so-and-so to my new girlfriend, poor woman. Janet, thank you. Take care. And I hope this isn't appropriate. Well done. It's 12:01.
James O'Brien on LBC.
4 minutes after 12. Here's a very good way of thinking about it from Lucy, and it ties in with a lot of what we've been talking about, including, as I said, that's why I was reminded of it by that texter who asked to remain anonymous, about the triggering of trauma. Lucy writes, bruises heal, yes, but the nervous system will remember the trauma, and that's why Janet has physical symptoms when she sees her abuser. Again, even 8-10 years after their marriage ended, after she left him, that's the nervous system remembering and, to a degree, reliving the trauma. All this stuff makes sense, and that's why she mentioned counselling as being the place in which some of this has become clearer. I'm going to read this because I hope Janet's still listening. A lot of messages along a similar theme. This amazing caller should feel so amazingly strong. When she has to meet her narcissist former partner, she should try and feel pity for him. That's what really hurts narcissists, if you pity them. Janet, you are amazing, and thank you for being the incredible woman you are. Don't let him think he's the bee's knees. He's a fragile, weak, and pathetic narcissist. Right, it's M. I'm sending hugs. And a couple of messages along this line. I'll do my very best to keep an eye on my inbox for reasons that I think will become clear when I read this out. Hello, I'm listening to James O'Brien's current phone-in. Are messages for reading out 100% anonymous? To which I can tell you, yes, they categorically are, and will remain so. If there's something you want to get off your chest or ask the hive mind, as it were, then rest assured I won't mention any names at all. 6 minutes after 12 is the time. Tess is in Manchester to steer us back to, it sounds odd, but when people don't realise that abuse is abuse. Tess, what made you pick up the phone?
Really just to say that, I've recovered. I've got over it to a certain degree. My life is good now. But if I go back 30 years, I became involved with a man who I thought really loved me. He was very attentive right from the start. He appeared to adore me. But then things started to creep in. But because I was in a vulnerable position at the time, I was a single mum, I had 4 children. I felt my parents weren't very supportive, so I felt completely alone, I suppose. I was very lonely emotionally. So I allowed, you kind of accept a little bit more of, do you know what I mean? You normalise it, I suppose. So they'll do one thing and you accept it, so then they go a little bit further, etc. And it got to the stage where he was controlling what I wore. He was.
How does that work, Tess? Because I think the third person to tell me that. Does he go shopping with you, or does he just operate like a form of wardrobe police?
Like a form of wardrobe police. So it was. If I went out without him, I couldn't wear a skirt. I couldn't wear anything flattering.
Yeah.
If I was going out with him, that was fine. It was like I was a bit of a trophy on his arm. Okay. But if I was going out without him, it was very much, I had to go out in sort of jeans and. And
did he ever articulate why? Is it because he didn't trust you, or is it more complicated than that?
He didn't really articulate why. He did start to become violent.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And then we had a child, and at that point he would ring me constantly during the day to make sure that I was in the house. If I was out of the house, I had to explain where I was going and how long I was going to be.
What was he frightened you might be doing? Do we know?
I suppose he was frightened I was going with somebody else.
Must be that, mustn't it? Or
it must be,
I can't think what else it would be. It must be so exhausting. Never mind frightening.
It is exhausting. Mum of 5. I've not really got a lot of time to do anything else.
Or energy.
Well, quite. But then it did take a very dark turn. It got to the point where it was so exhausting I couldn't deal with it anymore. And I'd started to do a university degree, and it was a challenge to get out the door every day and to do this.
Yeah.
He'd say things like, "Oh, I'm supporting you doing this," but really he wasn't. No. He wanted to be in control of everything.
Independence would be his anathema, wouldn't it? It'd be his anything that it didn't involve him at all. The less it involved him, the worse it would be.
That's right. But then he was doing things like checking the mileage on the car to make sure I was going straight there and back. If I mentioned driving through somewhere that wasn't on the general route home, he wanted to know why I was going that way. And he was quite aggressive with his questioning. So when I got into my third year of my degree and I was doing my dissertation, I had to go and speak to my tutor.
Yeah.
And he insisted on coming with me. Which was really awkward. And at that point, I realised that this was just unacceptable.
What, did he sit in the car, or did he come into the...
He came into the office.
What, and just sat there?
And just sat there, yeah.
I mean, it's got a slightly comical side to it now. I don't know whether you can see the funny side,
yeah.
but there's nothing funny about it at the time. It's just so strange. What did the tutor say?
Well, I think he realised that I was... Yeah,
it takes
really
an outsider sometimes for the insider to clock. So that was the moment where you thought, I can't make excuses for this because I'm seeing my reality reflected in this tutor's eyes.
That's right. And then one day I'd left my phone in the lab, and I came back to my phone, and I'd literally been out of the lab for 15 minutes, and I had 17 missed calls.
Whoa.
So things came to a head when he became violent towards one of my daughters. So that was the end of the relationship, and I'm glad.
Yes.
I should have done it a lot sooner.
Wow.
But then it came out later on. So after I'd sort of remarried and my daughters had grown up a bit more, one of my daughters disclosed sexual abuse.
I'm so
sorry. He was obviously he was grooming us. He was grooming the family. He wanted access to my daughters. That was what it was about. And
Is she all right? Has she had the help?
Well, it was three. It was all my daughters, and they are absolutely amazing.
Good.
They're superb, and we went straight to the police. Obviously, if I realised, I would have gone to the police earlier. I did go to the police when he was violent towards my daughter. That was the first thing I did, but they kind of dismissed it as a bit of just an argument, really.
Didn't get the help. Right? It's a recurring theme.
We didn't get the help we needed. And then, so we did get, I mean, he was prosecuted and he went to prison, and everything, like my girls are so strong. I'm so proud of them.
Good.
They've got exceptionally good lives. And very, very brave. I couldn't be more proud
I don't
of
know
them.
if this sounds a bit daft, but you sound very strong. You sound like someone I wouldn't want to mess with, and it's a bit like Janet saying, I outside the home, I'm a very strong woman. At work,
Absolutely.
I'm the person people come to with their problems. That's really helpful, I think, for people listening to realise that none of that matters. If you find yourself in one of these spiders' webs, it doesn't matter what you're like. You're going to get wrapped up in the web, aren't you? You're going to get caught
Absolutely.
up in it. And sometimes the more you wriggle, the tighter the web will become.
Yeah. I would never have thought I was the kind of person who would allow something like this to happen to me. But when you're low and you're vulnerable, it's very, very easy. And they always say, they prey on the weak, and they do.
Yeah.
They see a chink in your armour, and that's what they use. But I'm very strong now.
Clearly, but that's the point, isn't it? I think it could happen to anybody. It's like that thing I keep referring to. What's the difference between you and them? And it's often luck. You didn't come across someone at a moment in your life when you were susceptible or vulnerable to that kind of behaviour, and you could have done, and some people didn't, and it didn't happen to them. It's incredible to reflect on the sort of roads not taken or the sliding doors test. Thank you. If you want to know what a potential abuser sounds like, here's a text that is unsigned. You, they write, must have made him feel that he cannot trust you. So that's what a potential abuser sounds like. So if you are so insecure that you think that your partner is going to be cheating on you with their Open University tutor, you blame your partner. It's her fault that you feel this way. And listen, I'm being unkind to you because you deserve it, but a moment of kindness to say, if you do some work on yourself, you might realise that this is a you problem, You point a finger at somebody, in this case your partner, because it's her fault you feel that you can't trust her. There are 3 fingers pointing back at you. And that's obviously not scientifically relevant, but it is, I think, quite powerful. You must have made him feel he cannot trust you. Also, just listen, mate. Seriously. It's 12:15.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 17 minutes after 12. Amy's been in touch. She tells me that you must have upset Charlie the farmer again. There are at least 100 tractors travelling down the A30 at the moment in Devon. I hope they're not coming for me. I really do. I give you a number as well, I think. Refuge, if you're affected by some of the issues that we're discussing, then Refuge are available 24/7, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on 0808 2000 247. It's a conversation about domestic abuse. Probably a mistake for me to try to distinguish between emotional and physical completely, because one would usually bleed into the other. But the story that's inspired the conversation is about the former Scotland Rugby Union captain Stuart Hogg, who was emotionally abusive, domestic abuse of a non-physical nature towards his estranged wife. But I don't know. I don't know how commonplace or how rare the absence of physical violence is. 18 minutes after 12 is the time. I've got some funny stuff to share with you, so it may land a little bit incongruously in the context of such a serious conversation, but it is quite important, stroke funny. So rest assured that I haven't forgotten my promise with regard to making you laugh at Liz Truss again. That could become a daily feature, couldn't it? But this legal letter, the cease and desist letter sent to Keir Starmer, once the most senior lawyer in the country, as if he would not have a fairly confident grasp of the law, telling him to stop saying that she crashed the economy. What would be the single most embarrassing thing to come out for Liz Truss after she sent a letter telling a prime minister to stop accusing her of having crashed the economy? What would be the single most, if for example I went down my clip mine, my clip mine, we spend a lot of time in our clip mine with our torches on our heads looking for nice juicy clips. What would be the most embarrassing clip that we could find for Liz Truss if she is throwing her toys out of her pram about the fact that Keir Starmer accuses her or describes her as having crashed the economy? And I suppose also, what would be the most embarrassing thing that could happen to our friends at the Institute of Herberts, the Institute of Economic Affairs, who of course boasted about how they had essentially taken over Downing Street when Liz Truss became Prime Minister. So if Liz Truss's claim that what happened to the economy when she was in charge of the economy had absolutely nothing to do with any of the things that she did to the economy when she was in charge of the economy, despite the fact that the people to whom she turned for her economic advice claimed that they now had their hands on the steering wheel. They didn't literally claim it. Someone posted a note saying that Downing Street is now an IEA, a petri dish or experiment. I forget the exact words. And the fellow that was running the IEA at the time posted an emoji in sunglasses to say, hey, yeah, we're so cool. So they claimed they were in charge, or accepted the description of them being in charge. Everything went south. She's complaining about Keir Starmer saying that she crashed the economy. What would be the most embarrassing clip I could find for her? And what would be the most embarrassing clip we could find for the Herberts at the IEA, who, no doubt will be popping up on LBC this evening, despite never disclosing who it is that pays their wages? I don't know. I'll let you think on that one. And we've got some other news from the world of politics. I mentioned, I don't think he's gone in on, or they have gone in on, Jess Phillips in particular. I genuinely find myself stunned that not a single Conservative has come to the defence of Jess Phillips after she was abused in the roundest fashion by Elon Musk. You have to conclude that they're simply not allowed to, that it has been made known by Kemi Badenoch's people that if anybody defends Jess Phillips from Elon Musk's vicious and unevidenced attacks, then they will be persona non grata with the party leadership. But I have an ex-Conservative MP who's had a swing at honest Bob Jenrick. I'm going to give you a clue. If I said to you that an ex-Conservative MP has taken some time off from fast catamaran sailing in order to have a swing at honest Bob Jenrick, would you be able to work out which Conservative MP it was? I'll leave that hanging, and I shall share the details with you before home time. Lauren is in Margate. Back to the very serious matters in hand, and it's a question really about the obvious abuse, which would be physical, and the unobvious abuse, which I suspect is every bit as harrowing and traumatic. Lauren, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. I'm a little bit nervous.
It's only me. It's only me, but I grant you, it is quite nerve-wracking territory. So I probably shouldn't have said that this time. Take your time.
I went through, and it wasn't physical. First of all. For a long time, I didn't. The thing is, you don't realise that it's happening. Yeah. It just sort of like creeps in bit by bit, the controlling of, the same as the lady said before,
yes.
What to wear, who your friends are and who your friends are not, where to go, what to eat.
What to eat?
He actually controlled the shopping.
Wow.
The things that he didn't like to eat, he wouldn't have in the house.
Right.
Silly things like crisps, flavoured crisps that he didn't like. We had 2 children, and they were very, very young.
Oh.
And it still affects me now, 15 years later.
Of course it does. That's why that message is so resonant, isn't it? That phrase is so helpful, at least it is to me, that the idea that the nervous system remembers the trauma.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. You know, I still can't look at myself in the mirror long enough because I still see this person that he made me think that I was.
Good Lord.
You know, he used to buy me. I was like when I was pregnant. He wouldn't let me sleep in my bed. I had to sleep in the spare room because he didn't like the look of me being pregnant.
Oh my Lord, you poor thing.
What he said is that I was fat.
Right.
Yeah, and you know, I'm going to have stretch marks, and you know, the baby was. He wouldn't touch my belly with the baby moving. I didn't enjoy being pregnant.
I bet you
because
didn't.
I didn't look at what I was growing into.
Well, you were beautiful when you were pregnant, but he made you feel that you were ugly.
Absolutely.
What a scumbag.
Yeah. It was awful. And
when did the pendulum start swinging back? When did you start overcoming the grooming, if you like, or the gaslighting? When did you start undoing it?
I haven't.
Well, you left though.
I left. Oh, sorry. Yes. I actually. Nobody knew. You hide it. It was embarrassing.
Of course you do. Of course.
You know, because how could you? I couldn't put it into words of what was going on.
No.
It was embarrassing. And I eventually confided in my sister-in-law.
Right.
And she convinced me to go and see a solicitor.
Okay.
Because I was convinced that he said if I ever left, he would see me in the gutter. Wow. You know, I came in, as far as he was concerned, I came into the relationship with nothing, and I'll leave with nothing.
Yeah.
And
so you needed to know what your rights were, really, before you could even begin the process of building up the wherewithal to leave.
Yes, but it still took me 2 years.
I bet it did. That was quick. I think that's courage. I think
to the courage to actually leave. And when I did told him that I was going to leave, he actually went round the house with a clipboard, room by room, to tell me what I could take and what I couldn't take. And I walked out of the house with nothing but myself and my 2 children and our clothes.
And I worry that you're still so traumatised by it. Have you spoken to anyone? Have you had any counselling, Lauren?
No. I don't
know if that's something you could look into. Because, you know, I can't give you the comfort that I would love to be able to give you. I don't have the skills or the training, but I think you might benefit from getting some of this stuff off your chest in a safe environment.
Oh,
I know, I really do. I've had therapy, and I've been through nothing like what you've been through, and it did me a power of good. So I speak from a position of some experience.
Yeah, well, maybe.
Trust me.
I'm not. Yeah.
Go on. Seriously, I'll just give it. You never know. And was there? I mean, what did the children think looking back? Did they realise it wasn't? Because you don't know it's not normal. The longer you're in it, the more normal it all becomes, I suppose.
Yes, it does. And well, when I did eventually leave, my 2 children, they were very young. My daughter was 4 and my son was 6.
Right.
And my son suffered. He was the one that suffered, and he still does now.
Oh, bless him.
Not because of the lies that I walked out. He convinced my son that it was my fault that I left. I was having affairs.
Which you obviously were.
No, I was not. No.
Was he?
No.
Was he faithful?
Yes, he was.
Okay.
No, he was. He was having affairs.
Because that has come in a lot. A lot of it is projection. So it's not just. 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 this paranoia or insecurity thinking that you'll be cheating on them. I've also got this from Maggie quite early on in the conversation. The perpetrators of such behaviour will sometimes be cheating themselves and projecting it onto their partner. This is what happened to me. And Maggie writes, I've since learned that this is very common.
Yes. But he actually went into my workplace because he was convinced that I was having an affair with one of my colleagues.
Wow.
And he actually attacked him.
No.
Yeah. He actually attacked him, and I went into work feeling, I actually left because I was so embarrassed.
Of course you were.
So I put my notes in. I actually left work because I couldn't face anybody in my workplace knowing what he had done. And it was something that he was working on. I know that now.
Yeah.
I can see that now. My son absolutely hated me up until he was 18, 19, when it was only the fact that with all the court letters, I actually kept all in a file.
Right. And he had a look at them when he was older.
They both had a look at them, and then they realised that
what you'd been through.
And my son was quite traumatised because he said, why didn't you tell me the truth all them years ago? So but I didn't want to put my son through. Who would he believe, me or his dad?
I don't know.
So I literally took it on the chin.
But also you didn't want to take away from him the dad that he thought he had.
That's right. That's right. So I didn't want my son to look at his dad, even though at times I really wanted to tell him, because with my son as well, it was a fear of my son turning into his dad.
Of course.
Looking out for them to have a relationship or anything. So, I'm nearly 60, so I still feel the trauma in my head.
I can hear it in your voice. I can hear it in your voice. And that is normal. That is completely normal. I don't know if you know that. That is absolutely normal. And even, I would say, inevitable, given what you've been through.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your story, which will help other people who haven't made the break.
Honestly, James, I'm so glad that you took this on, because it's all that I think physical and mental abuse is on par. Yeah. It's exactly the same, because it's as you say, it's awful that somebody does have physical, but mentally. It never leaves.
Well, we can hear the scars, even if we can't see them. And it's brave of you to tell the story.
Thank you.
No, thank you. I don't know if you would be wrong of me to say this, but you're beautiful. Don't let him govern what you see when you see yourself now, Lauren.
Thank you.
You see what your children see. See what everybody else sees. See what people who love you see.
I know. I'm so good at acting now. I put this mask on.
I know.
It's that mask. So, but it keeps me going.
Well, we've all got to. I'm not going to mention therapy again, and I'm not going to cry, and I'm not going to make you cry. But I'm going to just say that thing once more, which is see what the people who love you see when you look in the mirror.
Thank you.
You take care of yourself. All right.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Stop saying thank you. I'm grateful to you, and you're amazing. I mean it. It's 12:31. Amelia Cox has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:35 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the question of abuse, where the scars aren't visible, is a good way of putting it, isn't it? Has been really quite extraordinary, and I'm grateful to everybody who's rung in, as are many, many people texting me. I'm going to read out one message. I'm normally a little bit impatient when we have conversations a bit like this, and the switchboard fills up in the first instance with men. But today's not one of those days. I fully appreciate that this goes both ways. It's just the fact that the story that has prompted the conversation is about a man's domestic abuse of a woman, but particularly in the non-physical sphere, although of course women can physically abuse men as well, but particularly in the sphere of emotional abuse, emotional violence. Of course, men can be the victims of women as well. It's just not the way that the conversation has been steered by me today, and it is very much by me. So there's none of that usual disdain for the fellas who can't help making it about them. That is not the case. And I say that because I want to read this out from I'm not going to say any names on the messages, actually, just in case. Hi, James. I'm not ready to call in about this, but I hope you'll read out my message. I'm a man living through emotional abuse from my wife. I just want men listening to this topic who might be being abused, particularly emotionally, by a partner, to know that they are not alone. They should not feel shame. They should not feel guilt, and it is not okay. Please, could you also read out the men's advice line number? And they add, thank you for your show. Every day it teaches me that we all have more in common than what separates us. Let's hope so, eh? And I'll get that number and read it out shortly, because I am hearing from a few men. Mike, I've read your messages as well, and I wish I could offer you some more powerful advice than I can, other than it sounds very wrong what's happening to you, and I don't think you should be putting up with it. This is, I can say this name because Adrian describes himself as a senior practitioner within community mental health services, and tells me that sadly, tells us, a large proportion of patients that we assess present with complex trauma as the result of violent, controlling, narcissistic men. It breaks my heart when I hear what these victims have endured, and that's why I was at great pains with the last lady to describe what she felt as normal, even perhaps inevitable, and as opposed to in any way something that is a subject of shame or embarrassment. But hey, we're humans. You're right. It turns out fast catamaran sailing was too strong a clue. The Conservative politician who has broken with... we've got audio. Oh, I see. The clue, the original clue. This is probably our favourite clip of all time, isn't it? I was talking earlier about the clip mine, and we will be down there in a minute looking for some Liz Truss nuggets. But this was the clip.
What do you want to do if you're not an MP?
Skydiving, motorcycling, fast catamaran sailing.
It's just the way he had it all. It's the way he had it ready. It's almost endearing, that. And he did. I said to you at the time that the hard man of Brexit, Steve Baker, did do some really honourable things. When I don't want to do the curse of O'Brien. But anyway, it is he that has had at least a swing of sorts at honest Bob Jenrick for his obviously racist comments earlier this week, although Baker doesn't go quite that far. He described Jenrick as leaving the door open to racism when he posted about the UK importing hundreds of thousands of people from alien cultures. So, yes, it was the hard man of Brexit, Steve Baker, who I think has become the first prominent Tory to actually call out the disgusting rhetoric of honest Bob Jenrick for something close to what it is. 12:39 is the time. Back to the conversation in hand. Liz is in Chesham. Liz, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Liz.
So nice to speak to you. I've listened to you for 16 years.
16? Good Lord, you go back to the Beat the Sweet days almost. Gosh, thank you. Well, that's what a lovely thing to say. Thank you.
No, it's really nice. So I think the first thing I want to say is I nearly didn't call in because in my head I was like, mine wasn't that big a deal.
Okay.
You know, and I think so many women and men, you touched on that just now, but they think it's, you know, oh, it's just one of those things, it's my fault, it gets brushed under the carpet. And we've heard some utterly horrendous stories today, but there are others that, even though might not reach the threshold of prison or whatever, you know, they still have such a massive impact. Like, I work in this space, I'm a therapist, I can still feel my voice shaking now, my ears clicking.
Gosh.
It does stay with you, even if you do loads of work and become a strong person because of it. So all those people that are thinking, oh, well, mine's not that bad, that are listening at home, I think they still absolutely deserve the help that, you know, that is out there. You mentioned Refuge, Women's Aid is really good as well.
And I've got the line for men as well now, which the men's advice line, respect, is 0808 801 0327, or if you just Google or search men's advice line. And I should also add, I know therapy itself can be very expensive, so I don't want people to think that I'm out of touch when I encourage people to go down that road. So you've come out the other end, obviously.
I have, yes. And it's really interesting because I am a therapist and a coach, and it was my clients talking to me about their relationships that made me realise, oh my God, Liz, what are you doing? your relationship is like this.
Oh, so this isn't something you've done since you came out of the relationship.
No.
This is something you were doing while you. So it's a physician heal thyself scenario then, in a bit.
Yeah, I was kind of. I mean, it's made me niche into this area more.
Good.
Because I now have such a passion for it. But it's I mean, mine was I've been in actually 3 abusive relationships, but this one that was the most emotional. Covert, subtle, slowly chipping away. I think it was quite different. It was definitely the most impactful because we met just before COVID. So because of lockdown, we weren't socialising as normal. We bubbled up. So I was only seeing him. So his jealousy didn't come out. The way it did come out was he was very jealous of not my ex-husband, but someone I'd seen after him.
Right.
And like you were talking about projection earlier, he had cheated on me very early on in the relationship. He was obsessed with this person I'd had a relationship with, looking him up on social media, just absolutely obsessed. He was a lot younger than me. He couldn't get over that. It was just constant. It never, ever stopped. And the fear I had of him telling my children...
That you'd had a relationship with a much younger man.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was... There was so much to it. I mean, I've got so...
No alarm bells at this point. Is that because of lockdown, do you think, or...?
I think the alarm bells would have started if I hadn't have been so in love with him. And it's like I'm quite a sensible person.
Sure.
I think. Excuse me. But I think...
You were smitten.
I was completely...
Love is blind, they say, for a reason, don't they?
Absolutely.
Yes.
And the love bombing, which I'm not sure if that's been mentioned yet, but
no, it hasn't.
when after our arguments, he would be so lovely. He wouldn't do that "it will never happen again" thing. In my experience, that's a bit of a myth. They don't even admit that they've done anything wrong. But it's so, like the makeup and the physicalness afterwards, the emotional, the love they give you afterwards, the future faking, talking about marriage all the time. He was a police officer. He's not anymore. He's been sacked because of this.
Crikey.
But he, we've got to get married by this age, else you won't get my pension.
Okay.
So really thinking that he was, going to look after me. And I mean, I didn't live with him. We both had children from our marriages. So thank God I never lived with him. Thank God I never had kids with him. And actually what got me to realise, I say it was my clients, but it was also we were going to buy a holiday home together. And I was going to put my life savings into it. He'd got a mortgage that he was just basically going to spend. And it was my friend that said, "What are you doing?" And, I think because he realised, I started asking questions and saying, could we do it a different way? I think he realised I was on to him, so it stepped up. And,
What was his record? Did you find out about his history? Because it sounds like a modus operandi the way you're describing it.
Oh, my goodness. So much history.
Really?
So when I left him and said, and I called him out and said, "You're emotionally abusing me." And as I drove away, I said, "That's the last time. I can't go back to him." The other thing that had made my decision, my daughter said to me, "I can't believe you're going back to him, Mum. He just makes you so sad." And she was 13 and she was like banging the dashboard of the car because she was so angry with me.
Gosh.
So I said to myself as I drove away, I'm never going back. And I messaged on Facebook his ex, which a lot of people say that makes you out as a crazy ex-girlfriend.
Not really.
She said, "I can't speak to you. He's probably next to you telling you what to write." I assured her. We agreed to video message. And she told me so many things that I had heard the other side of from him.
Wow.
She had cheated on him. That was always his excuse for being so insecure.
Right.
He had also told me he cheated on her 5 times. He delighted in telling me that.
Right.
And yet, it was just so messed up. And, you lose your mind. I had completely...
Well, that's why you reached out to her, just as a sort of reality check, see the world through her eyes. Otherwise, you're being increasingly confined to seeing it exclusively through his.
Yeah.
Not your own, but his.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that was pretty much my wording. Like, all I want, I'm so sorry what you've been through. All I want to know is this what he does? Because I think he's been emotionally abusing me. So I did go back to his house and confronted him. I was very angry, but he would always demand to look at my phone. I'd never ever asked to look at his. I did ask to look at his. He showed me some of the pictures that he'd sent her, pictures of us on holiday together, trying to make her jealous.
Oh, what a weirdo!
She was still completely in love with him for a long time. She tried to kill herself twice. It was just, and I just realised who he was in that moment, and I was calling him out, and that's when it got really physical, and he tried to throw me out of his house.
Oh, I'm sorry, but you're shot of him now.
Well, no, he's still trying.
Right.
This house that we nearly bought, he's claiming that I have paperwork for it, because he did buy it in the end, I didn't.
Okay.
And he's trying to get the police involved, saying I've got stolen goods because I've got paperwork. And he used to be a policeman himself, so it's so pathetic, and you can kind of laugh about it and go, that's so pathetic, he's still doing this, but there's still an element of threat there.
And exhaustion as well, beyond the obvious trauma. The what you would call the invisible scars of the emotional abuse. I'm coming away with a sense of genuine exhaustion at the face. They call it hypervigilance. You'll know this, Liz, because you're a therapist, but this notion of hypervigilance where you cannot relax because you don't know where the next attack or intervention is going. What's he going to do next? What are they going to do next? When are they going to pop up next? Even after you've left, in this case, even after you've ended the relationship, still trying to control, still trying to, that exhaustion. And of course, that has an epic impact on mental health as well. Liz, thank you. Man, you're right. I think it was Brendan who texted in to say they should teach children about this in school. We don't have any idea how widespread and how commonplace it is. You're right. And, my switchboard is testament to that. 12:48 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
51 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. A little light relief. So you will be aware that Liz Truss has sent a cease and desist letter to Keir Starmer, insisting that he stop saying that she crashed the economy. What would the word be? Her kind of source for this conviction is a character who is associated with the so-called Institute of Economic Affairs, which of course was widely regarded as having provided the what would you call it, the inspiration for the economic policies that Liz Truss introduced as Prime Minister. So two things occurred to me. The first is, well, she's going to look a bit stupid if she's ever accused anybody else of having crashed the economy, isn't she?
And that's what we need to do as a government. We need to find better ways of doing things and more efficiency, rather than wasting money and crashing the economy as happened under the previous Labour government.
Pardon? What was that last bit?
And that's what we need to do as a government. We need to find better ways of doing things and more efficiency, rather than wasting money and crashing the economy as happened under the previous Labour government.
Well, that's a bit awkward, isn't it? I mean, the narrative that the global financial crisis of 2008 was somehow Gordon Brown's fault was something that David Cameron and his cohorts were very keen to propagate, but it was objective nonsense. Anybody vaguely informed knows that Brown and Alistair Darling arguably did more than any other politicians on the planet to steer the world out of the worst impacts of that global financial crisis. But there is Liz Truss accusing Gordon Brown of having crashed the economy. So who did she rely on for her claim that the things that happened to the economy after she did things to the economy had nothing to do with her? She relied on someone called Andrew Lillico, described here as an economist and right-wing commentator. Now, he's linked to the Institute of Economic Affairs. How embarrassing would it be if two of the chief Herberts at the Institute of Economic Affairs had recorded themselves in the immediate aftermath of Liz Truss's budget saying that if everything goes wrong, it will actually be our fault? And that would be beyond possibility, right? There's no earthly way that even our clip mine would yield up such choice nuggets as two senior Herberts at the Institute of Economic Affairs actually recording themselves, chuckling about the fact that if Liz Truss's fiscal event were to go horribly wrong, it would actually be all their fault. I mean, there's no earthly way that, I don't know, the then head of the IEA, Mark Littlewood, or one of his a favourite colleagues, Julian Jessop, no doubt appearing later with Ian Dale on LBC, but there is no earthly way that these two characters would actually have recorded themselves saying that if Liz Truss's policies turn out to be disastrous, I don't know, i.e. crash the economy or something, then it would actually be all their fault.
Julian, what do you think? We're on the hook for it now. If it doesn't work, it's your fault and mine, my friend, isn't it?
Oh, well, fair enough. It's a nice problem to have that you might be blamed for major policy changes. But the key point is those policy changes, I believe, are the right ones.
But of course, those policy changes had absolutely nothing to do with what happened when those policy changes were introduced. So that's someone called Mark Littlewood and someone called Julian Jessop, both at the time of the so-called Institute of Economic Affairs, chuckling about the fact that if Liz Truss's economic policies, which they were widely regarded to have inspired, turned out to be a disaster, then it would be all their fault. Albeit that Liz Truss now, by citing another Herbert from the Institute of Economic Affairs, is trying to claim that it actually had nothing to do with her and therefore them at all. So what would possibly inspire someone linked to the Institute of Economic Affairs to produce a report arguing that Liz Truss's policies had absolutely nothing to do with the collapse of the UK economy, despite the fact that two of his former colleagues are literally on tape saying, if it all goes wrong, it will all be our fault? I suspect that you think I sometimes exaggerate about how nepotistic and ridiculous this network of secretly funded organisations and their patsies in the UK media and UK politics have actually become. And then I bring you little nuggets like that from the bottom of the clip mine. You won't be hearing or reading much about this anywhere else in the UK media, with the exception of the inestimable Adam Bienkov over at Byline Times, who I often bump into down the clip mine, and occasionally even I may even occasionally pinch some nuggets out of his cart. I'm going to squeeze in one more call on the much more important topic of emotional abuse, because it's a mum's perspective, I think, and we don't have a huge amount of time, but I want to squeeze in Sue in Watford. Sue, what made you pick up the phone?
Oh, well, thanks for... I'm sorry, my emotion, but you've really raised an important topic, and I think you're seeing that through some of the calls.
Yes, very much so.
Because I think the physical side of abuse, absolutely unacceptable, but the emotional abuse is as damaging. Yes. I watched my daughter in an emotionally abusive relationship. Didn't realise it at first, but would just question some of the things she would tell me that she was being told. It wasn't what she was wearing or what she looked like, it was who she was.
Right.
And I mean, you know, she's a kind girl, sees the best in everyone, an absolute target for someone who wants to control.
Yes.
Everything was her fault.
Well, they see your compassion, I'm reading from another texter who says it's actually the compassion that they focus on. So when they say flattering things like, I miss you when you're not here, stay in tonight, I need you, they're appealing to your good nature.
Absolutely.
Incredible.
Yeah. But, you know, I know you haven't got all the time, but in the end, it resulted in one particular day I was out and I constantly kept getting calls from her. She's a nurse.
Right.
And I thought, she's at work. I don't understand why these calls are coming through.
Yeah.
And I picked up eventually because I was at work and I had to leave. I had to get to her because I couldn't understand what was going on.
Oh, Lord.
And we had a conversation and I looked and I said, this is beyond me. I don't know how to help. We paid for her to have some counselling. And the counsellor said, I'd like to meet your husband. Right. Because I think you're not the issue.
Okay. So she was having some sort of collapse, some sort of breakdown.
I felt she was having a breakdown. Sadly, the following week she was admitted to a neurological hospital and was in for 60 days and lost the ability to communicate properly. The consultants, they had about 4 or 5 different consultants from different areas of the brain looking at her, couldn't really understand what was going on.
Oh, God.
But one of the saddest things I've ever heard her say to me was in her mumbled talk, she said, perhaps this is happening for a reason, so he will love me. And I've only remembered this while I've been waiting.
I'm sorry.
So this is a really... It's easy for people to say, like he would tell her, you're needy. You're being too sensitive. Everything's your problem. It's very easy, I even think, for people to see that someone is not coping. Oh, for goodness sake, water off a duck's back. But when you're living it, it's subtle. It's a constant drip into who you are as a person.
And who knows what will happen when that burden becomes intolerable or becomes unbearable. So I'm so sorry. I wish I'd taken your call a bit earlier because I feel bad about having to move on so quickly. But I know that we got the main thrust of that experience across. Good Lord, maybe he'll love me. If you missed any of today's show, and it was in many, no thanks to me, it was an incredible listen, but for a whole heap of reasons. You can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.